This episode of Gators Breakdown is brought to you by Manscaped. Get 20% off plus free shipping and 2 free gifts when you purchase the new Perfect Package 3.0 kit with promo code Gators. Head over to manscaped.com and purchase yours today.
Gators Breakdown, the Gators fan podcast, because there's never a dull moment in Gator Nation.
Gators Breakdown podcast is ready to go. I'm your host, David Waters, and you can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. And a jam-packed episode this week. We'll start off with joining me, as always, is Will Miles, co-host Will Miles. Will, what's going on?
Nothing, man. Just like everybody else in the country. I'm coming to you live from my basement, and everybody else is in their basement listening to this thing.
Yeah, so kind of weird this week. You know, your schedule's been shuffled. Now, you're joining us right before you have to go to work on 8:30 on a Tuesday night.
Hey, man, 2 more days left, and then I'm back to being a day walker. So I'm running the Bill Sykes schedule right now, but eventually I'll be back to days, and things will be a little bit more normal. But, thankful to have a job. There are certainly people out there who are less fortunate, and so hopefully we can sort of take their mind off of it and talk a little bit of football.
Yeah, absolutely. So, special guest this week, as I said, and for this week, the co-founder of SportSource Analytics, Stephen Prather. We brought him on because last week he released an in-depth look at Dan Mullen's offense in his last 4 years at Mississippi State, and we'll talk about that and what that means for Florida as well. But Stephen, welcome.
Thank you. I apologize. The work at home day. I've got 4 girls, and they decided to come in here. So if you hear my little 4-year-old, that's what she's doing here. So sorry, guys.
We've all had that happen to us at least once this week, buddy.
Yeah, no question. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Yeah, really in-depth look there at what Dan Mullen did in his last 4 years at Mississippi State, how it translates to Florida. We'll get into that discussion a little bit. But before we get started, Stephen, what is SportSource Analytics? Why'd you start it, and how'd you get into it?
Yeah, it was a fake business plan that I put together when I was getting my MBA at Vanderbilt. It was a communications course, and basically they were trying to show you how to put together a business plan. I literally put together a fake business plan, and I've always been a huge fan of analytics, and partly through my baseball background, it just always been in love with numbers. And so I put together a business plan that wanted to really focus on working with athletic directors and trying to evaluate coaches. But instead of doing it just based on how well a guy did an interview or who you know or who you like, I wanted to try to bring data to it. So kind of put that together. That was back in 2007. Did not even think about actually 2005. I did put it in 2005. I did it again. Got my MBA, got out of business school, started working in the commercial real estate world. And then 2008 hit, and I found myself in need of some auxiliary income of a commission sales broker. And my brother, who was also doing real estate in Atlanta, kind of called me up and said, "Remember that business plan you put together?" And long story short, we were able to start kind of putting it together, and really launched it really back. I was looking 2011, I think is when we officially launched. And it kind of slowly but surely found our way in really pretty highly involved in the college football landscape. We work with about 30 different FBS programs throughout the country. We've gotten involved in 45 head coaching searches in the last 6-7 years. We're the official data provider for the selection committee. We do a lot of work with conferences. We sell data. So we kind of got our hands in a wide variety of areas in the college football world.
Awesome. Pretty good feather in your cap when you say you provide the committee some behind the scenes stats. Yeah,
we just re-upped that contract, which is fantastic. We've been there since day one with them, and that's been a really fun thing we've done. It's been really neat, kind of working with the committee and building the platforms they use and kind of helping them dig into the data has been a lot of fun.
anything you can share that, not necessarily, not too much to get you or the committee in trouble, but anything interesting along the lines of the College Football Playoff Selection Committee and how they use your data, or just some, random story that our listeners might find interesting?
I will tell you, the fun part's just been interacting with a lot of the different committee members, and some of the backgrounds from, now I still say being able to interact with Condi Rice. And I mean, her knowledge and curiosity was honestly fascinating. I mean, she had one of the most active and curious minds I've come across, and it was really fun kind of just seeing her view of football and how she wanted to dig in the data. And honestly, people ask all the time, and we're obviously not in the room when they're doing their stuff with the data, but it's been fun kind of in the meetings we have with them. I mean, they dig really deep into what they're looking at. I mean, I know you're never going to please everyone in the decisions that they come down to, but I always tell anyone that asks, it is a very thorough process, and there's virtually nothing they are not looking at in some form or fashion.
So we don't need the BCS to determine the 4 teams.
No, we do not.
Will, anything wide scoping you want to hit first before we get into the nuts and bolts of his piece?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the biggest question I would have is, how do we get Clemson knocked out of this with the with the ACC? Can we help you rig the numbers so people start treating them more like the Big 12?
I know. Seriously, it's Clemson's been fascinating to watch. They're one. That I remember when Dabo first got hired, you're kind of like, what in the world? Who's this guy? And it's really pretty incredible what he's kind of built in that program they built. And like anything else, I mean, they've certainly benefited from the ACC. There's certain years it's had good years, and it's a lot more up and down than certainly a conference like the SEC is year in, year out. But it's really impressive what they've built and what he's done there. And I wouldn't have guessed it when he first got hired. If you had told me they'd be where they were, a decade later, I would have said I wouldn't have guessed it. But I mean, he's really turned into a phenomenal head coach.
All right. We'll get into what makes Dan Mullen's offense so successful coming up here. But before we do, remember you can find Gators Breakdown on news4jax.com/Gators Breakdown. You'll find all the Gators Breakdown episodes there, as well as News4Jax coverage of the Gators and Jacksonville sports. If you miss all our past episodes, you can catch them there at news4jax.com/Gators Breakdown. Also follow Gators Breakdown on Twitter and Facebook at Gators Breakdown. So, Stephen, let's get started with highlights of your deep dive title. Control the line, control the ball, control the game. You went back to Mullen's 2014 through 2017 seasons at Mississippi State. Why was Mullen chosen for this, and why that time frame?
Yeah, so obviously we've got more time on our hands than usual right now. And we like to do this in the off season anyways. We want to kind of really dig into some some of the different programs that we study, and looking at offensive minds and defensive minds. So I've been really focusing on offenses. And Mullen's actually always kind of fascinated me from a standpoint of his offense. And what always stuck out to me was certainly in that last part at Mississippi State was the success he was having, without having necessarily quote unquote elite talent, certainly relative to a lot of the SEC. And so, I wanted to dig into him. And I think, I think even going back to the early Utah days with Meyer to then obviously, to Florida, then becoming the head coach, he's just been a coach I've always had my eye on. And I've always kind of wanted to dig a little bit deeper into what he does offensively. And so that's what I did. And so I wanted to kind of look at, what's his offense about? How is it designed? And I picked the last 4 years at Mississippi State, partly because I think it was, at that point, that was as fully his program as it could ever be. There was every single player in that program had been, his handpicked, that it was his culture, it was his offense. And so that's the reason, I really focused there. I didn't really want to look at the Florida years yet, just because I don't think he's quite there yet. It's still not his full roster. It's still, you still got to get your culture fully ingrained. So I wanted to really focus on those last, 4 years. I thought was the best indication of Dan Mullen's offense.
Will, before you jump in here, because Stephen mentioned it, so I want to get this part in. Stephen, I don't know if you saw, but Mullen responded to one tidbit of your piece here. So, a quote from your piece was, in his last 4 years as the head coach at Mississippi State, Dan Mullen's offense was the 8th highest rated offense in all of college football by our proprietary offensive rating system. During this time, Coach Mullen's team had the 10th highest team roster talent rating, the average 24/7 sport composite player rating for rated players on the roster for the years in question there, 2014 through 2017. So Mullen, and then that was in the SEC there. Yeah. So Mullen responded on Twitter with, quote, "Did I read this right? 8th best offense in the nation with what was rated the 10th best players in the SEC. I think we had some good players," in the quote. So, Will and I, we have the recruiting debate all the time here on Gators Breakdown with a lot of listeners and followers out there about how much, stars matter. And in the totality of teams competing for national championships, there's too much evidence the other way to suggest that you can just go out there and win titles, without top tier prospects. The data's not there. But, this does show that Mullen is one of, if not the best, of getting the maximum amount out of his players.
He's a phenomenal player developer, which I think is vital when you look at certain guys. And it's the reason he did so well at Mississippi State, because, you go to place at Mississippi State and you're not going to go out recruit Bama and LSU and Georgia and Florida. You're not going to do it. That doesn't mean you can't get good players. And they did get, they were still generally top 25, top 30, nationally. But when you're in the SEC and you're particularly in the SEC West, you could have a really good recruiting class and still be 6th best in your side of the conference. So I think Mullen has proven throughout his career that he's a phenomenal player developer. I think he evaluates talent well too. I think he evaluates it differently. I think he knows the type of players that he's looking for. The best example of that's Nick Fitzgerald. That guy almost had no other actual offers. Was running an option offense at a small school in Georgia. No one heard of him. He turns in the guy, put up, some Heisman level numbers, during his time with Dan Mullen.
And look what happened to him after Mullen left.
That's right.
Well, so I'm actually, one of the things that really jumped out in the document that you released was the fact that Mullen seemed to adjust when he went from Prescott to Fitzgerald. So, you mentioned that he was typically an 11 personnel under Prescott, so 1 tight end, 1 running back, 3 wide, and then switched to 12, bringing in an extra tight end when they went to Fitzgerald. Is that something that you consistently saw over the 4 years, that he was adjusting to his personnel? Because that's been one of the things I think while he's been at Florida that's really impressed me is last year with the wide receivers being the strength, they went 4 wide a lot and often even split LaMichael Pirine out and sort of had a 5 wide set oftentimes as well. And that's not necessarily something you think about when you think about Dan Mullen's offense, but it seems like he's adjusting to his players rather than necessarily saying, this is my offense, I'm going to recruit people who fit my specific offense.
Yeah, I think he's got a history of that. I think Mullen's arguably one of the great jobs I've seen done with that was with Chris Leak. And how do you still work, even if a guy may not be your ideal guy for your system or the ideal players, how do you still work around that? Can you be effective in your offense? And I think Mullen's got a really good history of doing that. And just from everywhere he's been, he's done that. And so I do think he's got a personality on offense more than, an exact playbook or that. I think he has a certain style he wants to play, but then he's not going to be so wed to that he's not going to change things and do things a little bit different, personnel-wise based on who he's got. And I think what he does a great job too is understanding who are the guys that can make plays. At some point, he wants to get the ball in playmakers' hands, and I think he's got a good history of doing that as well.
Stephen, was there one piece of this throughout the history and the look of this that you didn't expect to find that you found that surprised you?
I don't think I realized just how an elite of a first down team they were. It's people forget 40+% of football is 1st and 10, and so ultimately it's hard to be an elite offense if you're not an elite first down offense. And so I don't think I realized just how elite of a first down team they were. And then even just looking at, we kind of have an offensive line efficiency ranking that we look at. we look at tackles for loss, sacks. We look at percent of runs that go for 4+ yards, and we look at kind of short yardage run situations on 3rd and 4th down, and they were right up there with the best in the country on that front. So it's like I think I always do. He wanted to have a physical way they played, but I think that surprised me a little bit on just how elite they were in some of those categories.
Yeah, so I guess the one thing that's really sort of been the thing that people have criticized Mullen about is his record against ranked opponents. He was 0-9 against Alabama. He's now 3-8 versus LSU, 0-2 versus Georgia. And I think, year 1 and year 2, Florida played really, really well in those 2 years under Mullen. But now we're getting to the point where they're going to have to start beating Georgia for its seasons to be deemed successful. Are there things about his offense that even with a team that maybe doesn't have quite the talent level of a Georgia or an Alabama that you think he can do to exploit those teams, especially with a senior quarterback in Kyle Trask coming back, where maybe there are some things that he does that would give Florida an advantage?
Yeah, I think it's easy to get, like, Mullen got criticized for that a lot. If you looked at his record, Mississippi State, but the simple reality was, if you go look at Alabama and LSU's, those teams' record during that time, they weren't very losing almost anybody, period. So I've always felt that was an unfair criticism of him. And I think as Florida, I think this 3rd year is going to be a key year on that front. I think what Mullen's offense, I think what makes it unique is, I guess another thing that did surprise me was just how balanced they were while being efficient in that balance. It's one thing just to have balance and you're not good. You can certainly be balanced, but I think I was a little bit surprised at how well he was able and how balanced he was in a wide variety of down and distance scenarios, and being able to, still run the ball effectively on 2nd long, still being able to run the ball effectively on 3rd long, still being able to pass early, so you'll be able to do things. So I think that surprised me. I think as he continues to build his culture, and I think he gets the type of players that he wants and can develop at Florida, I think he's going to give those teams, a lot of trouble. You saw it a little bit last year. I think it was the LSU game. You're seeing it. He does a lot of things offensively. I think what he does with how balanced he is and how effective he can use the quarterback, he makes the defense not be able – they've got to play a lot more base, and they've got to simplify things a lot more than I think they would against other opponents.
Stephen, the crux of the piece, and it was in the title as well, was Mullen likes to control the ball.
Yeah.
And one metric out there that a lot of people use to measure that is time of possession. And if you look at that necessarily didn't seem to be the case.
Yeah.
Dak Prescott in 2014, Mississippi State was 59th in time of possession, 2015, all the way down to 121st in the country. But you had an electric quarterback who can move the ball. They probably, they were scoring. 2016, Nick Fitzgerald takes over, and you expect the offense to start running more, controlling time of possession. But in that season, the Bulldogs ranked 87th in time of possession. The one year that metric really showed up was Mullen's last year, 2018, time of possession ranked 8th in the country. Yeah. Stephen, what I think your work showed was there's multiple ways to control a game, right, and some that may mean more than time of possession.
Yeah, it's, time of possession. Look, it's if you look at like a correlation, if you run a correlation analysis on time of possession, it's essentially meaningless, at the aggregate level. But you're exactly right. The way Mullen controls the game from the data we looked at was, he controls it through 1st down. When you're as efficient as he is on 1st down, you control the game that way. So partly when you're a good 1st down team, typically that leads to being a good 3rd down team. And that's another way you control the games. You stay on the field. And then beyond that, just being a very efficient, being a quality red zone team, those are different ways that we think you can control the game without necessarily eating clock. Eating clock is a way you can do that. And I think you saw that in 2018. They did a little bit more of that. I don't think Mullen necessarily is trying to control the game with the clock. I think he's trying to control the game with controlling the line of scrimmage, with being extremely physical team that can run the ball in a variety of scenarios, that being a team that can use the quarterback in a variety of ways, being a team that can still have a very effective passing game as well. So, I think you're exactly right. His control of the game is not necessarily through time of possession, but through efficiency.
So in order to get that control, you really have to have the offensive line to be able to do that. And certainly Florida last year struggled pretty mightily on the offensive line. Is there something in particular that you notice when you look at Mississippi State, that the type of offensive lineman that they bring in, or something that allows them to be as successful on first down as they are? Because, I mean, obviously, if the defense knows you're trying to get ahead of the chains on first down, they can do certain things about it. So what is it about the guys that they recruit and that they put up there up front that Florida's going to have to build in order to get that advantage? Because last year they certainly didn't have it.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of that is time to, it's we love for things to want to turn around in 1 year. I think this coming up year, and obviously we're getting thrown off a little bit with not having spring ball and some of that, but I think some of it's just development. I don't think there's any kind of magic of who the players they got from a standpoint of offensive linemen in Mississippi State. I think it was just, getting them in the culture, getting them in the system, and over time, at some point too, that does take time to develop that sideline. And there's a lot of luck that comes in offensive line and just getting them not having injuries and different things like that. So I think it's just, you're going to see it develop over time. Mullen, that's a major part of their identity on how he wants to play, and he's going to make that a priority. And I do think you'll continue to see major development in these next coming years with Mullen, especially on the offensive line.
Steve, it would be hard to look at 2014 through 2017 or 2014 through 2017 and not think about what we have seen the last couple of years and the success Dan Mullen's had early on. Surprising you in any way with Felipe Franks, who a lot of people didn't think much of after the 2017 season, his first season where he's starting and go win 10 games, and Kyle Trask comes in for injured Felipe Franks against Kentucky and leads a comeback and goes on to win 11 games for the Gators in the season. Anything surprised you out of these first 2 years when you went back and really dove deep into these 2014 through 2017 games?
I think one thing I said, I think Mullen arguably is one of the best quarterback guys in college football. If you go back to his time coaching Alex Smith at Utah to then he's always been very, very good at getting quarterbacks to play at a high level. And I think that's one of the single keys to being a great and consistently great offensive mind. The simple reality is if the quarterback doesn't play at a high level, not much else matters. And one thing you remember too, the offensive mind that Mullen reminds me the most of is Bill Snyder. A lot of people forget, Meyer will tell you, and I'm sure Mullen will say the same thing, a lot of their early spread principles that they started to install at Utah came from Bill Snyder. Snyder was on the forefront of really utilizing the quarterback. When you look at Michael Bishop and what he did there, and then when Snyder came back his second stint, what he did at the quarterback position with Colin Klein and with the different guys he had there. I think Mullen reminds me a lot of that, where he is really able to utilize the quarterback in very, very unique ways as far as how deadly they can be on the ground with their feet and in the run game, but also still being very efficient and effective in the passing game. This isn't an option team where you got quarterbacks running, but they can't throw the ball 10 yards down the field. He's got a sophisticated passing game that's designed very well, that attacks all parts of the field. He's got a great short passing game. You can stretch the field. And then you throw in the quarterback being a run threat in virtually every scenario, and you can understand why he's so hard to prepare for defensively.
Yeah, so I guess when it comes down to it, brass tacks, if Florida's in a close game with Georgia next year, 3rd and 1, 4th and 1, and everything's on the line, where do you think Mullen's going with the ball? Given that he's probably going to have Kyle Trask as his quarterback, and this is sort of the argument that's going on in Gator Nation is, do they want a running quarterback who maybe doesn't have the experience, or do they want the guy who showed he could throw the ball last year? So I'm curious as to what you think Mullen would go to in one of those critical situations next year when he's got Trask.
Yeah, and that's a great question. And if you look at the history of Mullen, like I said, really going back to the Alex Smith days at Utah, he ultimately would love to have a quarterback. And if you get a third down threat at quarterback, and you saw some of the numbers in that breakdown, his quarterbacks were lethal on third down. As far as and that's so. that's why I still say one reason I'm still not quite ready to break down Mullen at Florida yet is I still think he's got to get – I mean, he'd like a quarterback that I think could be more of a weapon on those short third yardage. But, I mean, yeah, I think Kyle Trask might – I mean, Trask is a better athlete than people give him credit for. And I mean, he's certainly not a Dak Prescott or Nick Fitzgerald. But, you know, I think as he develops in Mullen's offense and it gets more confident in it, I think you may see him be a little bit more of a threat. I think Dan may be able to really – find some creative ways to utilize him in the third short running game, you know, this next season.
Stephen, how would you kind of go on bouncing off of Will's point, and we'll kind of, you know, stretch out a little bit here. How would you handicap Florida, Georgia next year, SEC East, and you know, Jamie Newman coming in for Georgia, and there's a lot of hype around him coming from Wake Forest and the ACC, and maybe showing a potential there that a lot of people are maybe even thinking Georgia can take the next step in offense with him at the helm. How would you handicap the SEC East right now?
I'm very, very, very bullish on the Gators. Partly because I'm a big believer in Mullen. I think he's, you know, I've known coaches that have worked for him, and I think Dan's one of the smartest coaches in college football. I think as he continues to build his culture, as he's got a returning starter at quarterback and has some other weapons, I think Georgia is going to be one of the more fascinating teams for me this year, just because, you know, they lost so much. You know, you go lose your offensive line coach, who's, you know, one of the best in the country. You lost almost your entire offensive line. And so, you know, you've got a brand new quarterback coming in. You got a brand new offensive coordinator coming in. And it's going to be really fascinating. I mean, I think, you know, they could end up being – I mean, they have loads of talent, and Kirby's a great coach, and they're going to play good defense, and they're going to do certain things well. But what's going to be interesting is this is going to be a totally new way of Kirby playing. I mean, Kirby's wanted to play a lot more, you know, like the little bit some of the older Saban teams, you know, back in, you know, 9, 10, 11. And then he's bringing in a coach that's going to try to be a little bit more wide open with how they do things. And it's going to be interesting to see, you know, how that affects the way Kirby coaches. How does it affect the defense? How does it do things? So, as I said, I'm extremely bullish on the Gators, you know, that's coming up here.
Well, you got anything?
No, it's been great. I appreciate the time, and certainly an interesting insight into Florida's offense.
Yeah. Steve, one more thing with the college football playoff. Do they look at your data different from their first ranking all the way till they pick the final 4 teams? Is it something they look at the end of the season? Are they breaking it down as the season goes on? Are they making more of a ultimate decision with your information that you're giving them, more so than playing along with it during the season?
That's a good question. You know, I mean, I said there's a lot of those. Yeah, I mean, I say this. The one of the things I think is beneficial about the committee is that, you know, it's a wide variety of personalities, and it's a wide variety of people. You know, wide variety of backgrounds. You've got, you know, coaches on there that are probably relying a lot more on their breakdown of film, and then you've got some over there that are probably really leaning on, you know, the data is what they look at. And I do think as the season goes on, I think you start to kind of realize in a given season, you know, what's starting to matter more. You know, how's this season playing out? You know, what teams are starting to separate themselves, you know, week 5, week 6, week 7. And I do think they probably start to break things down differently and really see what matters. And it is interesting too, because every year is pretty different too. I mean, you look at this year, we kind of do a breakdown every year at the end of the season and kind of look at the final 4 teams and you know, kind of dig into, okay, where were these teams elite? You know, did they share something in common? This year was extremely unique in how elite every offense was. I mean, these were arguably the top 4 offenses in college football were the teams that made the playoff. And I think this LSU team was one of the worst defenses to win a national championship since, you know, the Auburn 2010 team. So I do think to answer your question, I do think with each year you're going to have, as the season plays out, you kind of start to see the DNA of the season. I do think they start to kind of change the way they look at things a little bit.
Awesome. So, Stephen, definitely we'll have to get you on again.
Yeah.
Hopefully, we're talking about Florida being, in a top 4 next time we're talking, and we can kind of break down the data there of what made Florida a college football playoff team. But anything else you want to share out there about your services?
No. It's like I said, we appreciate you guys having me on. I think I'll share a little bit before we start the podcast. I've been to probably a dozen games down the Swamp. I think it's one of the best places to watch a football game. I was a huge Spurrier guy, and then remained a huge fan of Meyer, and I'm a huge Mullen fan. So love to see the Gators in good hands with Coach Mullen, and excited to see what they can do this year. Awesome.
Stephen Prather, from the co-founder of SportSource Analytics. Stephen, man, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Let's take a second to thank our sponsor, Manscaped. With free agency period done and no live sports on TV, there is an increasing excitement around this year's NFL Draft. The NFL Draft is all about new beginnings, and our sponsors at Manscaped are here to give you a new beginning. Manscaped offers precision engineered tools for your family jewels. Manscaped is the only men's brand dedicated to below-the-waist grooming and hygiene. Manscaped is forever changing the grooming game with their Perfect Package 3.0 Essentials Kit. The Perfect Package 3.0 kit comes with new and improved Lawnmower 3.0, waterproof cordless body trimmer, and a ton of other liquid formulations to round out your manscaping routine. This third-generation trimmer features a cutting-edge ceramic blade to prevent manscaping accidents, nick-free shaving thanks to Manscaped advanced skin-safe technology. And of course, let's not forget about the Crop Preserver, an anti-chafing ball deodorant and moisturizer. You already put deodorant on your armpits, right? So why are you not putting deodorant on the smelliest part of your body? When you purchase the new Perfect Package 3.0 kit at manscaped.com, you get the biggest bang for your buck. Subscribers get a new replacement blade refill for your lawnmower trimmer delivered to your door every 3 months, making sure your trimmer always stays fresh and clean. For a limited time, subscribers get not 1, but 2 free gifts. The Shed Travel Bag, a $39 value, and the patented high-performance anti-chafing Manscaped Boxer Briefs. This is the perfect package for your perfect package. Get 20% off plus free shipping with the code GATORS at manscaped.com. That's 20% off plus free shipping with the code GATORS at manscaped.com. Something else I wanted to put in here, Will, is something I wanted to look up today. And the crux of his article, as I said, it was a lot about controlling the game from different aspects here. And so I went back and looked at Mullen 2018 and 2019. And 2019, this past season, plays per drive. Ole Miss led the conference with 5.84 plays per drive. Alabama was fifth with 5.75. Florida was tied with Georgia for sixth at 5.69 plays per drive. So with LSU right behind those two with 5.6. So the better teams in the SEC all grouped together right there. Those were offenses that could stay on the field but balanced enough to get some quick scores too. In 2018, the Gators were seventh in the SEC in plays per drive. With 5.62, so only a hair below compared to 2019.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's been one of the things that's been pretty consistent about Mullen is his ability to at least keep the games close against teams that are more talented. Particularly last year, the loss to Georgia was 7, the loss to LSU was closer than the 14 that was on the board, and even when the team struggled, they've been able to sort of stay in the game and then been able to come back and win it in the end. I think the interesting thing is how he's done it, right? So in 2018, they threw the ball 39% of the time and rushed it 61%, and then Mullen adjusted with Trask and the offensive line last year, and they threw the ball 56% of the time. So they threw it 17% more often last year than they did in 2018, and I think that's reflective of a lot of what Stephen was talking about in terms of Mullen being able to adjust to his personnel. So, you got Dak Prescott, you're in 11 personnel. You bring in Nick Fitzgerald, you're in 12. You've got Felipe Franks. There was a lot of a lot of read option and a lot of things where, Keontae Lewis was on the field because he was the blocking tight end. Well, now you get Kyle Pitts on the field, and he's much more of a catcher, and or much more of a receiver, and all of a sudden they're going 4 wide and splitting out the tight end in the slot. So, I think that's encouraging for Gator fans who hear us rail over and over and over again about recruiting. And really that the coach is able to make up some of that difference because of the ability to to manipulate his offense to fit his personnel.
Yeah, that goes to some of the next metric I found. Another aspect of controlling a game, yards per drive, not just plays, but yards per drive. How much are you making that opposing defense on the field run? Alabama led the way with 46.06 yards per drive. LSU was second with 45.24. Florida was third, but about 8 yards less than LSU. So Alabama and LSU definitely cream of the crop there with yards per drive. But Florida was third with 37.13 yards per drive. In 2018, seventh in the SEC at 34.77 yards per drive. So the Gators averaged 3 more yards per drive in 2019 than 2018 will. And kind of going back to your point that you just hit on, it's not a huge surprise with the bulk of the offense coming through the air in 2019. You throw the ball, you're going to get more yards.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is that you got to measure explosive plays, and Trask was able to generate far more explosive plays through the air than Franks was the year before. And when you look at LSU, that's really where LSU started to make their hay, is being able to hit explosive plays. So Florida last year, 11.8% of their throws were explosive plays. You look at somebody like LSU, they were at 15%. Alabama was at 19.2%. So, I would say the one weakness to the control of the ball strategy is if you're not hitting explosive plays, then you end up with drives like the drive that basically where Florida salted the game away for Georgia by having, a 7-minute drive in the fourth quarter. Same thing against LSU, getting stopped on fourth down at the goal line with like a minute left, where essentially the game was already out of reach. And that's maybe the next step for the Florida offense to take, is being able to be more explosive in situations where the defense knows that you have to throw the ball and knows that you're going to have to take some deep shots. And, the way the offense is designed is you take what the defense gives you. Well, that can be problematic if you're down by a couple of touchdowns in the fourth quarter. So, but again, it's you do what you do with your personnel. If you got Percy Harvin out there, you just tell him run deep and you chuck it. That's not necessarily something you can do with the guys that they've had there. Not that those guys are bad. They're just not Percy Harvin. And let's be honest, not a lot of people are.
Absolutely. So one more here, drives per game. And I put this one in here because I think it's kind of a team aspect. It's offense and defense here for me. To me, drives per game. This is one that can really depend on your defense getting you the ball back, creating turnovers. The Gators didn't fare too well here, as they were 9th in the SEC with 11.6 drives per game. Auburn led the way with 13.2. So 2018, another metric where the Gators are right in the middle, just like they were in the other metrics in 2018 of the conference, at 7th with 12.25 drives per game. So the Gators almost had one more drive per game average in 2018 than in 2019. That's why I think your defense plays a part in this too. Your 2018 defense played a part in getting the offense the ball more often and creating turnovers.
Absolutely. Well, and the 2009 defense, at least at times, had issues getting off the field.
Yeah, right.
And when you think about the number of offensive opportunities that Florida had against Georgia, certainly they squandered some things. They drove into Georgia territory quite a few times and then got stalled by sacks or penalties or what have you. But at the same time, they didn't have a whole lot of opportunities to drive into enemy territory because Georgia kept converting third downs. So, that's a big part of it. And we always talk about it being offense, defense, and special teams. And, Grantham has brought the defense up to basically a top 20 unit. Mullen has brought the offense up to a top 20 unit. Top 20 is not probably going to be good enough to get over those Georgia and Alabama humps. But 2020 is the time where you might have an opportunity because, like Stephen mentioned, Georgia's going to be missing quite a bit of their offense coming back. LSU had, 17 guys go to the combine. So there are some opportunities here for Florida to take advantage here in 2020.
Two more metrics I'll use to show success in controlling games. In 2019, the Gators were 4th in the SEC in first downs per drive with 1.56 and was 2nd in the SEC, only behind Alabama in 3 and outs with only 27 on the year. That put them third in the SEC behind LSU and Alabama in 3-and-outs percentage, with only 17.8% of Florida's drives going 3-and-out. Even with no run game, the Gators offense was able to stay on the field. 2018, 1.53 first downs per drive was almost exactly the same as 2019's 1.56. But while second in the SEC in 2019, that stat only came in at sixth in 2018. The Gators had 28 3-and-outs in 2018, so only one more than in 2019, but 2% higher going 3-and-out compared to the 2019 team.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think a lot of that is predicated on what Stephen was talking about with their ability to sort of set the chains on first down, and that obviously has been an issue at times for Florida with the offensive line over the last 2 years. So that's really the area where I think the strategy he was talking about in terms of controlling the ball really maybe is going to start to show itself at Florida over the next couple of years as those offensive linemen come in, get more comfortable in the system, and are able to start really giving that advantage that he had at Mississippi State, but this time with better skill players on the outside.
Yeah, well, so yeah. All that being said, Stephen's piece showed how Mullen controlled the ball and was at the top of the SEC and the country in doing so, and that was once he got his players in his system there. So. As Stephen said, we've yet to see Mullen with just his players at Florida. It'll be a couple seasons before we see that, but what a great start in taking his system and, as you said too, adapting it and still producing pretty good results of controlling ball games so far in these 2 years at Florida.
Absolutely. I mean, you look at where Florida's come from 2006 and 2016 and 2017, and I mean they couldn't throw the ball at all. And even in 2018, they struggled. I think Felipe Frank was something like 70th in yards per attempt. And last year, Trask was 23rd in the country. He was something like 26th in the country in passer rating. So, again, like you've got a quarterback who's playing at a top 20 level. The question is, can he jump higher than that? But at the same time, I'm not going to turn up my nose at a quarterback who's playing at a top 20 level, considering that I'm not sure we've had a quarterback who's been considered even above average since Tim Tebow left Gainesville. I mean, you could maybe say Will Grier, but even that, you go back and look at Grier and the potential was there. Mm-hmm. But at Florida in the first 5 or 6 games, the statistics, the Tennessee game, he sort of turned a corner, but the statistics are more indicative of a guy who was still learning and then was able to really apply that learning when he got to West Virginia. Hopefully that's the same situation with Trask, where last year was sort of, his representation of what Grier's first season would have been at Florida if he hadn't have been suspended. And then we get West Virginia Kyle Trask for the for the 2020 year.
Oh man, yeah. So, Will, that kind of does take us to our next point here, and you stirred the hornet's nest with basically you're defending why Kyle Trask should be the starting quarterback. Why your article was titled "Why Are Fans Trying to Push Aside the Best Gator QB Since Tim Tebow?" And oh man, I've tried as hard as I could to stay away from the QB debate. I joked on Twitter, the social distancing gives me a lot more time, so I decided to dive into the QB debate. And nobody is calling Kyle Trask elite. That's one thing I think. If you're a defender of Kyle Trask, I think that's one thing the other side of it kind of says is, to beat Georgia, to beat all those other teams, you got to be elite. Well, I mean, maybe we'll see. We'll see what 2020 brings. But in defense of Kyle Trask, I'm not calling him elite. I'm not labeling him elite, but I do think he is the best option for the 2020 season whenever that happens.
Well, I mean, we'll see. If it happens in 2021, that might not be true. But but here's the reality. Like when you go and look at the statistics, and you look at SEC StatCat has a great breakdown where you can really sort of slice and dice the data. And you look at it, and behind the line of scrimmage, Trask was inaccurate 7% of the time. From 0 to 10 yards, he was inaccurate 29% of the time. Went up to 41%, 11 to 20 yards, and then 72% at 20 plus yards. So he was pretty inaccurate deep throws, but a lot of quarterbacks are inaccurate on deep throws. And when you look at Emory Jones and his inaccuracy percentage, and granted only 38 attempts this year, but he was more inaccurate at each of those depths, and particularly inaccurate at that 0 to 10 yard depth, which is where a lot of Mullen's sort of first down, control the drive, all that sort of stuff lies. And, it's not Jones's fault. He's got less experience in the offense, less experience in practice. And Trask has come in and shown that he's got the ability to complete basically that he's able to move Florida down the field effectively, at least in his first year. And the question I wanted to ask, so maybe about a month ago, I looked at a comparison of Trask and Burrow and sort of came away from it thinking Trask doesn't really have that far to grow, because he can't make the leap that Burrow made because his completion percentage was so much higher. But I started looking at his throws by depth, and I started looking at offensive line. And LSU's offensive line in 2018 was very, very similar to Florida's offensive line in 2019 when you looked at the running games. So Burrow didn't have much help with the running game. However, he had a little bit more time on 2nd and 10 and 3rd and 10 plus situations. So he averaged 2.38 seconds in those situations, and Trask averaged 2.28 seconds in those situations. So less time to throw the ball, but Trask averaged 8.5 yards an attempt and completed 71% of his throws, whereas Burrow in 2018 averaged 5.2 yards per attempt and completed 57% of his throws. Well, LSU's offensive line got way better in 2019. And all of a sudden, Burrow was completing 70 or 80% of his throws for 9.7 yards per attempt, but he had 2.6 seconds to throw the ball. And so one of the things I think is really impressive is Trask completed 71% of his throws for 8.5 yards a throw when he had less time than Burrow did 2 years ago. And I think that really bodes well if the offensive line can improve, give him a little bit more time. People have looked at, and even I've looked at, his success rates going down the field, and they're okay, but they're not fantastic. Mm-hmm. And everybody goes, well, he doesn't have a strong arm, so he's gonna always struggle to throw the ball downfield. But I'm convinced if you give him 2 or 3 extra tenths of a second, that the guy's going to be able to come open and he's going to get the right read. And so I think really when we talk about Trask's ability to throw the ball down the field and drive the ball down the field, a lot of that is going to be predicated on the offensive line being able to keep him clean in the same way that LSU's line was able to keep Burrow clean.
I think that is the question, is how much of a step does he take if everything around him is better? If the run game's better, if the offensive line's better, how much does that help him? Is he status quo and those other things around him improve and that makes the whole offense elite? Or is it him making that jump to elite if the offensive line doesn't come around, if the running game doesn't come around? Can he turn it into elite without the help of the other pieces of the offense?
Well, look, I mean, if Clyde Edwards-Helaire had not played well last year behind an improved offensive line for LSU, Joe Burrow would have looked a lot worse. Right. I mean, Burrow obviously was otherworldly in terms of the numbers that he put up and his ability to change the game. At the same time, everybody around him got better. Now, part of that is that Burrow was getting them in the right play. Part of that is everyone improved during the offseason. Part of that is that, Texas wasn't as good as everybody thought coming into the year. But LSU played a legit schedule, so I mean, I don't think we can say it was level of competition. I think what it really boils down to is a quarterback in his second full year in the SEC who's already pretty good at reading defenses, things are going to start to slow down. And you could even see that going towards the end of the year. So, the game against Auburn, there were 4 sacks, there were fumbles all over the place. And, Trask acquitted himself decently in that game. But at the same time, we came out of that game and the Tennessee game, that was the second game of the year, going, wow, he really needs to get that internal clock where he knows he's going to get drilled, because he's going to cause some turnovers that are going to change games later on in the year. And sure enough, when's the last time you remember Trask fumbling the ball? He was much more adept at getting the ball out. He was much more adept at sort of having that internal clock, knowing he was going to get hit and getting rid of it. And like I said, it's not as if he had a whole lot of time to make that decision.
Well, and that came after he got hurt.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, part of that was that he couldn't rely on his legs anymore, right? Yeah. Because he couldn't move, which probably had something to do with it. But the reality is that if you've got a running quarterback and a throwing quarterback, and one is really good at throwing and one is really good at running, I think you almost always want to default with the throwing quarterback. In fact, I went back and looked at it, and the number of points you score for every yard that you get on an attempt through the passing game versus every yard you get on an attempt through the running game it's like you get 2.1 times as many points. So being able to chuck the ball through the air is far more important than being able to run the ball. Now, if you've got a guy who can do both, that gives you a real advantage. And that's what Mullen took advantage of when he had Dak Prescott at Mississippi State. It's what he took advantage of when he had Tim Tebow. But, if we go back and look at it, Tebow in 2006, they had the Leak and Tebow combination. At the same time, the question then going into 2007 was, well, can Tebow actually throw the ball? Well, it turns out Tebow can throw the ball, right?
Yeah.
like he went out in 2007, had one of the best seasons we've ever seen. And so the fact that Tebow was in the game, I'm sure, had a lot to do with what he had shown in practice. And, maybe he didn't have a complete grasp of the offense, but he was a special sort of character just because of the way he could run the ball. But then you factor in the fact that he could fake it and throw that ball to Lewis Murphy on the slant against LSU, or that he could throw the jump pass and those sorts of things. And, Emory Jones has come in and they've basically let him run the ball. And I suspect that the reins have been on there because he hasn't necessarily shown the same things that Tim Tebow did in practice. Now, that doesn't mean Emory Jones won't get to the point where he can do that. But I do think we need to acknowledge that Kyle Trask not only won the job last year, won the backup job, but it's not like he won it, he was the guy coming in second in mop-up duty against the Cupcakes before they got to the Kentucky game. Then they get to the Kentucky game, and he comes in when Franks gets hurt. And then Emory, they sort of had a little bit of a dual system going. I mean, there were a couple of times where Emory Jones got full drives. I mean, against LSU, he got a full drive. And by the time they got to the end of the year, they'd scrapped that, right? Like Emory Jones was in to be a change of pace running quarterback, and he was no longer getting full series to prove what he could do. And I think that says something about how Trask was able to not only win the job, but then perform on the field and also perform in practice.
All right, everybody. So you can go to readandreaction.com to catch Will's latest there, and really in-depth look at Kyle Trask, what he did last year, why he probably should be the starter moving forward there. So, Will, man, that was a good piece, but stirred a hornet's nest.
Well, that's the idea, man. We got to get people distracted from all the stuff that's going on in the real world by giving them ridiculous stuff to argue about.
Absolutely. So, Will, anything else, man?
No, man. Just hopefully everybody's staying safe out there. It's actually been relatively quiet on the on this. I mean, obviously there aren't sports actually going on, but it's good to hear that we've had some things recently with sort of leveling of the curve, but then also Major League Baseball's in talks about getting back to work a little bit, and the NBA's in talks about doing that too. So it's nice to see that the sports world's starting to pick up, and there's at least some hope that when fall comes around, things will be at least somewhat back to normal, maybe a new normal, but there's some hope that maybe we can have some football in the fall, or, it's a big enough revenue sport that maybe they'll decide to kick off in January. It'll be opening day on New Year's Day, man.
Man, Will, I tell you, there's something that has, really got my mind thinking about, college football, whether it's when it starts, I don't think it starts on time. I do think, and I've said it last week with Matt White too, I do think there's a season. I think it's delayed in some sort. I think they really want fans at the game. That really drives college football. I think they're going to try every way possible to try and get fans at the game. So I think that's why we get a delayed start. But, Will, if a season starts in January or February, something like that, if football becomes a spring sport for the 2020 season, and you move it to the spring of 2021, winter, spring of 2021, what happens to guys who are almost shoe-ins for a first-round pick, second-round pick? Do they go out? Does Trevor Lawrence even play? Does Trevor Lawrence go out there for Clemson and even risk going out there and playing a month, 2 months, 3 months before the NFL draft comes out? I think we could really see college football turned upside down if it starts playing in January. Well, I think it's very interesting. Does Kyle Pitts go out there and play for Florida? Does Marco Wilson go out there and play for Florida? I think it's very interesting. Those guys who should be getting ready for the NFL draft, as soon as mid-January comes around, they're not at school anymore. They're supposed to go prepare for their profession. I think that could really spin college football. If college football starts in 2021 for the 2020 season, it could be a wacky, with everything that's going on right now, and then throw that wrench into it as well, it could be a wacky season in college football.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't, right?
Right.
If I was the guy, I mean, Trevon Grimes is a great example.
Right.
He's coming back for his senior year, and now things are being delayed, and the question. But again, I think it sort of goes back to what does the NFL do, right? So if the NFL starts on time because they're willing to play in a bubble in Atlanta or something, and just every game is played in the Superdome and the new place in Atlanta, and all the guys are sequestered. I mean, they're not going to do that to college football. So, if you're playing in empty stadiums and the NFL plays and they have the draft again next April, then yeah, I mean, people are going to have to make some decisions. But I think if college football gets delayed, chances are the NFL gets delayed too. And the NFL has a vested interest in having college football as essentially its minor leagues. And so I do suspect that they're going to treat each other as partners when it comes to deciding what to do and how to do it. Certainly the way each entity pays for it likely will be slightly different. But, the reality is that if you can get live sports on TV right now, you could charge whatever you wanted for it. And a bunch of people who are listening to this podcast would go and pay it. So I do think that there's going to be an opportunity here for live sports to really maybe even enhance revenue in the current situation we're in with people not wanting to leave the house. And so it's going to be fascinating to see sort of what the risks are of moving the season back, but also what the opportunities are, right? Because it's sort of that game. The thing I'm thinking about, and this is obviously a less extended period, but the game in 2001 where the Tennessee game got moved to the end of the year, obviously Gator fans have jaded memories about that game, but at the same time it made the season unique, and it's something that sticks in my mind when I think about the 2001 season. I mean, obviously I was there, I was on campus during 2001, but the fact that the game got moved to the end of the season makes something special about it. I think maybe that's what we'll end up thinking about this year is, it's just sort of a unique blip in the college football landscape. And, same thing with all the major league strikes and NBA lockout and all that sort of stuff is 10 years from now, nobody's really going to remember. They'll just remember that Florida won the national championship. If that's what ends up happening, even if the game's in March, like we'll remember it. We'll still hang the banner. We'll just have to make sure UCF doesn't hang one too.
Zing! There we go. That's Will Miles. You can find him on Twitter at Will Miles SEC and his site readandreaction.com. I'm the host of Gators Breakdown, David Waters. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. Guys and girls out there, thanks for listening to this episode of Gators Breakdown.